In early 1944, behind the concrete walls of the Atlantic Wall, German officers waited. They were veterans of Poland, France, and the Eastern Front, men who had crushed armies, crossed continents, and survived years of brutal warfare. To them, war was no longer theory, it was experience. And when they spoke about the Americans, they laughed. According to German intelligence briefings, the U.S. Army was inexperienced, poorly trained, and soft, a force made of civilians, factory workers, and farm boys who had never faced real combat. Many German officers believed that when these men finally landed in Europe, they would break under fire. After all, how could soldiers trained for only a few years stand against men who had been fighting since 1939? The belief was widespread, dangerous, and wrong. The German view before D-Day. In the months leading up to June 1944, German officers stationed in France openly mocked American training. Reports described U.S. troops as overly dependent on equipment, food, and comfort. German veterans claimed Americans lacked discipline, toughness, and battlefield instinct. They believed American soldiers relied too heavily on firepower because they lacked courage. One German colonel reportedly said, "They fight like machines, not warriors." Another dismissed them as rich boys playing at war. This arrogance was reinforced by early encounters in North Africa, where inexperienced U.S. units had struggled against seasoned German forces at Kasserine Pass in 1943. To many Wehrmacht officers, this single battle confirmed everything they wanted to believe. But what they failed to understand was this: the American army learned fast, and it adapted faster. What German intelligence missed. While German commanders mocked American soldiers, they misunderstood American training entirely. Yes, American troops were newer to the war, but they were trained differently. U.S. training emphasized flexibility, initiative, and coordination between infantry, artillery, armor, and air power. Soldiers were drilled not just to follow orders, but to adapt when plans failed. Every American unit trained with live artillery support. Officers were taught to call for fire, airstrikes, and reinforcements with speed and precision. Non-commissioned officers were encouraged to make decisions independently if leaders were killed. German doctrine relied heavily on experienced officers and rigid chains of command. American doctrine assumed chaos and planned for it. This difference would become critical in Normandy. June 6, 1944. Reality arrives. When the Allied invasion began on June 6, 1944, German commanders were initially confident. They expected panic on the beaches. They expected confusion. They expected the Americans to retreat once casualties.
At Omaha Beach, it seemed they were right. American landing craft were shredded by machine gun fire. Units were scattered. Officers were killed within minutes. For hours, the beach was a killing ground. German defenders believed the invasion would fail right there. But then, something unexpected happened. The Americans did not retreat. The moment of shock. Despite heavy losses, small groups of American soldiers began moving inland. There was no grand plan, no perfect coordination. Instead, there was initiative. Junior officers and sergeants gathered whoever they could find. They crawled up bluffs under fire. They used Bangalore torpedoes, grenades, and sheer determination to break through defenses. German defenders reported something strange. Even when American units were shattered, the survivors kept advancing. When one group was pinned down, artillery fire appeared within minutes. When German strongpoints fired, naval guns responded with devastating accuracy. By the end of the day, American forces had broken through positions the Germans believed were impregnable. And for the first time, doubt crept into German reports. From mockery to concern. Within days of the landings, German field reports began to change tone. Gone was the laughter. Instead, phrases appeared like, "The enemy attacks relentlessly. They advance despite heavy losses. Their coordination with artillery is exceptionally fast." German officers noticed that American units rotated frequently. Fresh troops replaced exhausted ones. Supplies flowed continuously. Wounded soldiers were evacuated quickly, boosting morale. Where German units fought until they were destroyed, American units fought in waves. The Americans did not need to be braver. They needed to be sustainable, and they were. Facing American firepower up close. German officers soon realized that American soldiers were not soft, they were supported. American infantry attacks were preceded by crushing artillery barrages. If a German position revealed itself, it was targeted almost instantly. Forward observers moved with frontline troops, calling down fire with frightening speed. Above them, Allied aircraft dominated the sky. Even small movements during daylight risked air attack. German tanks and convoys were forced to hide, move at night, or not move at all. A German panzer officer later wrote, "The American soldier is dangerous not because of his courage, but because of the system behind him." But even that underestimated the reality. The myth of weakness dies. As the Normandy campaign dragged on, German officers began facing American troops in close combat. In hedgerows, villages, and ruined towns, American soldiers adapted again. They modified tanks to cut through hedges. Infantry learned new tactics within days. Units shared lessons rapidly. German veterans were shocked by how quickly Americans improved. One German report noted, "Each defeat seems to make them stronger." American soldiers were not fearless, they were not superhuman, but they trusted that support would come, that wounded would be treated, that replacements would arrive, that the system would not abandon them. This confidence changed everything. A war of attrition Germany could not win. German officers trained for decisive battles, but Normandy was not decisive. It was relentless. American forces attacked again and again. If an assault failed, another followed, and another. Losses were replaced, equipment was repaired or replaced entirely. German divisions, already stretched thin, had no such luxury. By July 1944, German commanders admitted the truth privately. They were being worn down, not by superior tactics alone, but by endurance, logistics, and scale. The final realization. As Allied forces broke out of Normandy during Operation Cobra, German resistance collapsed. Entire formations disintegrated under overwhelming pressure. American artillery and air power devastated retreating columns. German officers who once mocked American soldiers now fought desperately to survive. After the war, captured German officers spoke candidly. They admitted their mistake. They had believed American soldiers were weak because they were new. They had mistaken organization for softness. They had confused comfort with lack of resolve. One former German general, "We underestimated them because we did not understand modern war." Conclusion: the cost of arrogance. The American soldier in Normandy was not perfect. He was afraid. He made mistakes. He suffered terrible losses. But he adapted, endured, and advanced. German officers who once laughed at American training learned a harsh lesson in the hedgerows of France. War was no longer won by experience alone. It was won by systems, cooperation, and the ability to learn faster than the enemy. And by the time Germany realized that truth, it was already too late. Part 2. From Normandy to Collapse. By late July 1944, German officers in Normandy were no longer laughing, they were exhausted. The hedgerows that had once seemed like perfect defensive terrain had turned into traps. American units adapted again, this time faster than anyone expected. Tanks were modified in the field with crude steel blades welded to their fronts, tearing through earth walls that had stalled entire divisions only weeks earlier. German commanders noticed something unsettling. Every time they solved one American tactic, another appeared. What disturbed them most was not American bravery, but American consistency. Attacks came at all hours. Artillery fire never seemed to run dry. Even after failed assaults, the Americans returned with revised plans, fresh troops, and heavier firepower. There was no pause to recover. For German units, rest no longer existed. The breakdown of German assumptions. Before Normandy, German officers believed war was won by veteran formations, elite units, and hardened experience. In France, that belief began to collapse. American divisions rotated units efficiently. Battalions pulled off the line were replaced quickly. Wounded soldiers were evacuated within hours, sometimes minutes. German units, by contrast, fought until they were shattered or surrounded. German field reports began describing American soldiers differently: persistent, methodical, unwilling to disengage.
This was not how they had imagined Americans would fight. German officers also noticed the morale gap. Even under heavy losses, American units continued offensive operations. German units increasingly fought defensive battles they could not sustain. The Americans were not trying to win in a single blow. They were grinding the German army down. Operation Cobra, the illusion shattered. The final blow to German confidence came with Operation Cobra. After weeks of brutal fighting, American forces launched a massive breakout west of Saint-Lô. The bombardment was unlike anything German
troops had experienced. Thousands of aircraft dropped explosives in a concentrated corridor, ripping open German lines. Veteran German officers were stunned. Entire formations ceased to exist in hours. American armor surged through the breach, not cautiously, but aggressively. Units that had once been mocked for their training now maneuvered rapidly, exploiting gaps and cutting off retreat routes. German commanders attempted counterattacks. They failed. American coordination between air, armor, and infantry was overwhelming. German units were hit while moving, while regrouping, even while retreating. The sky itself had become an enemy. One German officer later admitted, "We were no longer fighting an army, we were fighting a machine." The retreat through France. As American forces advanced toward Paris, German officers faced a humiliating truth. They could not stop them. Roads were clogged with destroyed vehicles. Fuel shortages crippled mobility. Communications broke down under constant air attack. Orders arrived too late or not at all. Meanwhile, American columns kept moving. German officers noticed something else. American soldiers were not driven by desperation. They were confident. They expected victory. They trusted their leadership, logistics, and support. This confidence was contagious. It allowed American units to take risks, push forward, and recover quickly from losses. German troops, increasingly isolated and undersupplied, lost that confidence. A new respect too late. By the time Paris was liberated in August 1944, German officers no longer doubted American soldiers. They feared them. Captured German documents reveal a dramatic shift in tone. Gone were claims of softness or inexperience. Instead, American units were described as well-coordinated, dangerous, and relentless. But respect came too late. The strategic balance had shifted permanently. The Western Front was no longer a defensive line, it was a retreat. And yet, despite everything they had learned, German high command prepared one final gamble. The Ardennes, old beliefs one last time. In December 1944, German leaders launched the Ardennes offensive. Once again, they told themselves a familiar story. They claimed American troops were complacent, that surprise would cause collapse, that inexperienced divisions would panic under pressure. For a brief moment, it seemed they might be right. American units were caught off guard, lines bent, confusion spread. But then the pattern repeated. American units regrouped, artillery stabilized the front, air power returned when the weather cleared, reinforcements flooded in. German officers watching the counterattacks recognized the same truth they had learned in Normandy. The Americans adapted faster than they could react, and this time Germany had nothing left to give. What German officers finally understood. After the war, many German officers reflected on their greatest mistake in the West. It was not underestimating American weapons. It was underestimating American learning. The U.S. Army entered the war inexperienced, but it treated war as a problem to be solved, not a tradition to be preserved. Mistakes were analyzed, not hidden. New tactics spread quickly. Authority flowed downward when needed. By the time German officers truly understood this, their army was already collapsing. Closing reflection. German officers mocked American soldiers because they judged them by old standards. They believed toughness came only from years of combat. They believed discipline meant rigidity. They believed experience could not be replaced. Normandy proved them wrong. The American soldier was not the best trained at the start of the war, but by 1944, he was part of the most adaptive fighting system on Earth. And that system did not need to win every battle. It only needed to keep learning.